It's often said that Freemasonry is a beautiful system of morality, veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. We read in Masonic books and hear in Masonic lectures that the primary goal of Freemasonry is to take good men and make them better. But how do we do that? We teach them. We educate our members by use of our ancient teaching methods to improve ourselves, chip away at imperfections, and make us better human beings, better members of society, and consequently happier. Albert Mackey is quoted as writing, "The ultimate success of Masonry depends on the intelligence of us disciples." I find that a very interesting quote, as he seems to qualify the actual success of Freemasonry as well as the intelligence of its members. Mackey is not telling us that Masonry is successful because of the intelligence of its members. He is telling us that Masonry will be successful if it has intelligent members. Our lodges will have intelligent members if the lodge provides Masonic education. Our members will be educated and intelligent in Masonry if they take advantage of the education that is offered. If our members do not take advantage of the educational opportunities, or if the lodges provide nothing other than a hot meal and a reading of the minutes, then the ultimate success that Brother Mackey spoke of will not take place. One area of Masonic education that I would like to speak of today has to do with the nature of Masonic rites. I find today that many in the U.S. confuse or have but limited understanding of the actual differences between a Masonic rite and an appendant body. They are different things. In the U.S., many to most consider an appendant body as pretty much anything other than a craft lodge. Over and over, I read in U.S. Masonic publications and hear in lectures that the York Rite and the Scottish Rite are appendant bodies. When questioned as to why these two rites are considered appendant, I'm normally either given a blank stare or told that this is the way it has always been considered. Of course, organizations such as the Shrine, the Grotto, the Eastern Star, and many other like organizations are also considered appendant bodies. With these organizations, I completely agree with how they are identified. But let me explain why I do not consider the York Rite and the Scottish Rite as appendant bodies. Both the York Rite and the Scottish Rite are Masonic rites or systems of Freemasonry. A rite or a system of Freemasonry is a collection of unique rituals beginning in the Entered Apprentice degree and concluding in whatever is their final degree. The Scottish Rite and the York Rite are both considered rites because they both begin in their own Entered Apprentice degree. The Shrine, Grotto, Eastern Star, and other like bodies do not begin their actual first degree or ceremony in the Entered Apprentice degree. As a prerequisite, many of these organizations require membership in a craft lodge, meaning having obtained the Master Mason degree. And I believe that here is the source of a long-held confusion. Let me explain. Masonic ritual is the script that is used to confer degrees, open lodges, and is the words to our catechism. While a Masonic craft ritual is normally viewed as one that will contain the Haramic legend, the actual words and actions of the ritual or script can change quite a bit depending on who is the author or editor of that ritual. While the three craft degrees are similar to each other and follow a logical storyline, they can be quite different than other rituals of the same degrees. These differences can be looked at as the different rites of Freemasonry. You can think of it as different ways of telling the same story. When speculative Freemasonry was taken from England to France in its very early days, a language problem existed. It was necessary to translate the early English rituals into French if there was going to be any hope of successfully spreading Freemasonry in France. It would seem that when this translation was done, some consideration for the French culture was given. When we compare the early English rituals to the early French rituals, it is very easy to see that the French rituals are more theatrical in nature. The French rituals also spent more time on symbolism than do the English rituals. I believe that this has much to do with the two cultures and the differences in the rituals were reflections of those differences in those two cultures. We can trace quite a number of different rituals or rites existing in the world today from both the early English rituals and the early French rituals. But for the point of this study, we will confine ourselves to the rituals that exist in the United States today. If we look at Freemasonry that existed in what would become the United States of America just after the American Revolution, we can see some interesting developments. Most all of Freemasonry that existed in what would become the United States came from either England, Ireland, or Scotland. While variations of these rituals existed, they would all seem to have come from the same English source. The early Freemasons in the young United States began reorganizing Freemasonry here to suit their likes. Some thought was given to having one Grand Lodge for the entire country, but that seemed that in the final plan, their idea was to mirror the example of the organization of the new government, meaning more consideration for the states. With that, it was felt that one Grand Lodge per state was the best choice. In the years that followed, Freemasonry in the young United States began refining its nature and defining what it wanted out of each Grand Lodge. The general consensus was that each Grand Lodge should be as near as possible a copy of the other. Each would be sovereign and independent, yet very similar in the craft lodge experience to the other Grand Lodges. There was a desire for there to be one Grand Lodge per state, one language per Grand Lodge, and that would be English, and one ritual for each Grand Lodge. When we try to understand why they wanted the early Grand Lodges set up this way, we cannot look to any ancient charges for answers. The only answer that is logical for why they wanted the U.S. Grand Lodges so similar to each other is because, well, that's what they wanted, period. So with this one Grand Lodge, one language, and one ritual concept, the various Grand Lodges began to organize and refine themselves. Representatives of the various Grand Lodges would meet regularly to discuss the progress of Masonry in the U.S. But there was a problem for them in one area, and that area was South Carolina. To understand the situation in South Carolina, we'll need to take a quick look at England. Without getting into a lengthy history of Freemasonry in England, two groups having different Masonic philosophies developed in England prior to 1800. One styled themselves as the Ancients, and the other the Moderns. The two Grand Lodges in England were, to say the least, unfriendly towards each other. But they did end up settling their differences, and in 1813 merged into what we have today as the United Grand Lodge of England. In South Carolina, just prior to 1800, there were also two Grand Lodges in that state, each representing one of the two styles of Freemasonry in England. Both of them were considered perfectly regular, but the problem remained that the collective desire of the U.S. Grand Lodges was that there be one Grand Lodge per state. Pressure began being placed on South Carolina for these two Grand Lodges to merge. The problem was they didn't like each other and found each other's Masonic philosophy wholly unacceptable. They simply did not want to merge. In 1801, a new development and a new problem came with the creation of a third Masonic body in South Carolina. This body did not trace itself back to the English style of Freemasonry, but to the French style. Throughout the Caribbean islands, a French style of Masonry called the Order of the Royal Secret, but more commonly known as the Rite of Perfection, had gained significant popularity. This was a 25-degree system of French-style Masonry that was very unique and quite different than English style of Freemasonry. The problem was it was poorly organized and lacked any central leadership. A number of Masons who had reached the highest degree in this French system met in Charleston, South Carolina to discuss the problems with this system. Their solution was to create a new system with a better organization. The result of this new creation is what we have today as the 33-degree ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. Keep in mind, this new 33-degree French-style system, like the old 25-degree system, was a complete system that included its own unique craft degrees. The two oldest and most popular rituals of the old 25-degree system in the U.S. are the Franken manuscript and the Bonsignor rituals. We'll talk a little more about them in a minute. So when this new 33-degree system was created in Charleston, its birth certificate claims to begin in the entered apprentice degree. But there was a clear problem. South Carolina was already under considerable pressure because they had two grand bodies controlling craft degrees. The U.S. Grand Lodge community wanted these two bodies to merge so that they would be one. The idea that a third body would be allowed in that state, which also controlled craft degrees, is unthinkable. While the early records of the Charleston Supreme Council, today known as the Southern Jurisdiction, do not exist, we can assume that there was strong objection to this new body controlling craft degrees. If the young Charleston Council ever did attempt to work in the craft degrees, it would have certainly been short-lived. But we have no information, one way or the other. All that we know from the records that exist is that at some point, the Supreme Council clearly confined its degrees from the 4th to the 33rd. Such was not the case, however, with the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Supreme Councils to be created. Each of these did work in the complete 33 degrees of the ancient accepted Scottish Rite, beginning in their own unique craft lodge ritual. The 2nd and 3rd Supreme Councils were located in the Caribbean islands, and the 4th was the Supreme Council of France. Finally, the two Grand Lodges in South Carolina did merge into one, and the Charleston Supreme Council did not work in the craft degrees. So all was well in the U.S. world of Freemasonry, at least for a time. New Orleans was founded by the French in 1718. The first documented evidence of a Masonic lodge in New Orleans was in 1752. The area was French in language and nature. Likewise, so was the Freemasonry. The Grand Lodge of Louisiana was created in 1812 by 5 French-speaking lodges. The Grand Lodge itself was French-speaking and organized much along the lines of many of the European Grand Lodges. Like so much of the early history of the Scottish Rite, great holes exist in the history of early Louisiana Masonry. Many aspects of early Masonry in Louisiana remain a mystery to this day. For example, in which ritual or rituals did these early 5 lodges work? Or even, in which ritual did the Grand Lodge itself originally work? We simply cannot answer with any certainty. This brings us back to what was mentioned earlier concerning the Franken manuscript and the Bonsignor rituals. These two documents are collections of rituals of the old Order of the Royal Secret, the 25-degree system from which the rituals of the 33-degree ancient and accepted Scottish Rite built upon. These two collections date from around the same time, but clear differences exist in them. I won't go into any technical differences in the rituals themselves, but I will mention 2 very clear and very obvious differences. For one, the Franken manuscript is written in English and the Bonsignor rituals in French. The second clear difference is that the Franken manuscript begins with the 4th degree and the Bonsignor rituals with the 1st degree, the entered apprentice degree. It would seem that the Franken manuscript was written in English and began in the 4th degree out of an awareness of the preference of the U.S. Masons. The Bonsignor rituals were, however, worked in an area that was not bound to these customs. They were free to work in the French and the complete system. While we cannot be certain as to the actual ritual of the early Louisiana lodges or the Grand Lodge itself, we can make certain reasonable assumptions. The rituals would have to have been valid and accepted rituals to the Masons in the area. They would also have to have been available, and they would have to have been in the French language. The Bonsignor rituals fit the bill in each of these cases. While it is impossible to say with certainty, it is very possible that this ritual, or one very similar to it, was the Louisiana Masonic ritual at the time of the creation of the Grand Lodge of Louisiana. While there are many holes in our understanding of early Louisiana Masonry, there are bits and pieces of information that can help us with this puzzle. We know from discovered records that La Benefice Lodge No. 1 was created in New Orleans in 1807. It was created by 3 sovereign Grand Inspectors General under the jurisdiction of the Supreme Council of Kingston, Jamaica. This 1804 Supreme Council was the third council to be created and was in full relations with the Charleston Supreme Council. In 1809, these same SGIGs created a Lodge of Perfection in New Orleans, and then, in 1811, a Grand Consistory. This 1811 Grand Consistory exists today as the Valley of New Orleans. This 1807 New Orleans Lodge was a craft lodge of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, and it is the first such lodge that we can reasonably verify. But while this lodge existed at the time of the creation of the Grand Lodge, it was not one of the 5 lodges to create the Grand Lodge for Louisiana. The records are silent as to why they did not participate. The lodge did, however, merge with the oldest of the 5 lodges that created the Grand Lodge, Perfect Union No. 1, and it happened not long after the creation of the Grand Lodge. Another bit of evidence that we can point to is the reaction to New Orleans Masonry by those Masons who came into New Orleans from other parts of the United States. The 1803 Louisiana Purchase brought an influx of American merchants and travelers to New Orleans, many of whom were Freemasons. But the Masonry they found in New Orleans was at first perplexing and then frustrating. By the early 1800s, Freemasonry in the United States was settling into the concept of one Grand Lodge, one language, English, and one ritual. That one ritual was hammered out and became the Preston Webb ritual, which is the foundation of most all U.S. craft lodge rituals. But this was not the case in New Orleans. In New Orleans, the traveling Masons not only found lodges working in different languages, but also different rituals. It was, to say the least, confusing for them. The English-speaking American Masons traveling to New Orleans wanted their Masonic experience in New Orleans to be the same as their Masonic experience in any other American city. For the New Orleans lodges, and even the Grand Lodge, they saw the demands of the English-speaking American Masons to be at the least rude and bordering on un-Masonic. It was an impasse. The Masonry that was being practiced in New Orleans was the same style of Masonry that had always been practiced there. In addition, it was the same Masonry that was being practiced in Europe. The friction between the two groups turned into open hostility, and the Grand Lodge's position of allowing the lodges to work whatever ritual they chose was coming under strong attack. By the early 1830s, the Grand Lodge realized that it needed to do something in regard to the rituals being worked by the New Orleans area lodges. The Grand Lodge needed to take charge. The solution of the Grand Lodge was to create a governing body within the Grand Lodge for the supervision of the rituals worked by the lodges. They named this new body the Chamber of Rites. The Chamber of Rites was composed of 3 committees, or chambers, one for each of the rites that were approved to be worked in the lodges. Individuals proven to be proficient in the York Rite, Scottish Rite, and French or Modern Rite rituals were placed in their respective chambers to supervise the rituals of these lodges. The Grand Lodge saw this as a responsible solution to the problem, and they were satisfied. The English-speaking American Masons, however, were very dissatisfied. They saw this Chamber of Rites as only making the matter a lot worse. They were very clear in what they wanted, and that was one Grand Lodge, one language, English, and one ritual. They wanted the Scottish Rite and French Rite rituals purged from the Grand Lodge of Louisiana. The situation became so hostile that the Grand Lodge became fractured and split into groups. The mid-1840s saw a second Grand Lodge in New Orleans created along the lines of the wants and desires of the English-speaking American Masons. The events that followed are extremely complex, unpleasant, and lengthy. For this lecture, it is enough to say that extremely unfortunate times were faced by Louisiana Masonry. For the next 40 to 50 years, and in some cases longer, extremely bitter feelings were felt on all sides of the issue. The French Rite ritual was either driven out or merged in with aspects of the Scottish Rite ritual. All non-English and non-York Rite craft lodges were confined to one district created in the New Orleans area, the 16th Masonic District. Today, the 16th Masonic District of the Grand Lodge of Louisiana is composed of 10 lodges working in the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite Craft rituals. Certainly the Grand Lodge of Louisiana has the largest number of lodges working in this ritual of any U.S. Grand Lodge, but it's not alone. The Grand Lodges of New York, California, and Hawaii also have verified Scottish Rite Craft Lodge rituals. Outside of the United States, the Scottish Rite Craft Lodge ritual is one of the most popular rituals of well-recognized Grand Lodges in Central America, South America, and Europe. So why is the Scottish Rite Craft ritual so rare and in some cases outlawed by some U.S. Grand Lodges? The ritual is profoundly rich and symbolic. It does nothing but add beauty and deep meaning to our teachings. I believe that in many cases, the real answer has been forgotten or twisted with time. I believe that one answer is just because. Another answer is long-held disapproval for reasons long forgotten. Yet another answer is that some consider the Scottish Rite Craft ritual to be irregular. It should be pointed out that the common Masonic practice is to find Masonic bodies, either regular or irregular, not rituals. But in the end, I believe the heart of the problem is far simpler. I believe that in the very early days of Masonry in our country, a decision was made to do something. It was a decision that we should all be the same. Everything and everyone who was the same was good. Everything and everyone who was different was bad. It's as simple as that. Of course, the problem is we are not all the same. To go back to Brother Mackey's comment quoted at the beginning of this video, it may seem that our intelligence as well as our success will be determined by how much we know. In the case of the first 3 degrees of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, it may seem that we need to know more. It's one thing to prefer one flavor of ice cream over another. It's quite another to perpetuate falsehoods of a flavor you have never even tried. Thank you for watching. I hope this video has been of some value. If you like the channel, please hit the like button and subscribe to us. See you next time.